BeTheTalk, episode 219, featuring David Sabine. Welcome to BeTheTalk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with David Sabine. David, are you ready to talk?
I sure am. Nice to be here, Nathan.
David Sabine's career highlights the intersections of business, technology, education, and innovation. David helps disassemble bureaucracy and create sustainable, high-performance organizations where continuous improvement is deeply embedded in the culture. As an educator, he is an advocate and practitioner of flipped classrooms, experiential learning, and student-centric education. David Sabine, welcome to the talk.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Your TEDx Fort McMurray talk is called Rethinking Education. And you may or may not know what Talk Universe knows about me. I'm an instructional designer. I've been in the classroom. I've been an adjunct professor. I'm really, really into the things that you basically advocate in your talk. You talk about not splitting off the blue collar versus the white collar career tracks. You talk about agile classrooms and agile transformations, gamified classrooms, as well as empowering and trusting teachers. All things that I absolutely believe in. David, please just take us behind the talk.
Yeah, I was affected many years ago by a statement that I heard from a man named John Cage. He's a philosopher and composer, actually. And
the classical composer.
Yeah, and
okay.
He said that we would be better to have no schools at all than the schools we now have. And it got me thinking about the barriers that our education systems put in place as we grow older, and the patterns that are imposed upon students through these and the influence of the public education system. And I feel just fundamentally that we could be achieving much more. We could achieve much more potential with this investment. And so then in the talk, I described some of those conditions of the current educational system which prevent them from being truly awesome. The balance of taxation versus private investment, the influence of politics versus what we believe to be important from a curriculum and educational perspective. And then, near the end of the talk, I assert just a few modifications to the educational system, which I believe would catalyze major improvements. And that's the talk in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a nutshell. Since you brought it up in the summary, it's great to think about what, if we had a blank canvas and if there weren't any constraints, what could we do? And as you mentioned, we're not able to really do that because there is an influence of politics. There's an influence of equality and representation and, underrepresentation, and there's, privilege, and there's all these different, things. So what I really appreciate about your talk is that you acknowledge these things to be there. Take us a little farther into some of the things that you really recommend that we can do in the real world moving forward. And I know that you mentioned about empowering teachers. Maybe that's a great place to start.
I believe it is the place to start. And you're right about all these various factors that come into play. It's a very complex system that we're involved with. Those aren't negative or bad factors. They're just important to consider and consider how the balance affects the outcomes or affects the behaviors and so forth. I really believe that teachers are in the best position because they're connected daily with the students themselves and with the parents, and they are the interface that the public normally sees with the behind the scenes bureaucracy, so to speak. And so I really think teachers are in the best position to make the right decisions. And often, I guess, part of my talk comes from, or part of the reason I wanted to share those ideas with TEDx audience is that I feel that the teachers are often hamstrung. You're right. The first step, I think, is to understand that the teachers have this direct interface, and that's the most important interface.
Well, David, you bring this up, and it jogs to mind what one of my favorite talk alumni on this show. It was episode 150. It was Dr. Michael Hines, who is the superintendent of a school district on central Long Island area. And he just tweeted something the other day, right in conjunction with empowering teachers. I don't remember what the actual score or the acronym for this was, but he basically he just Instagrammed something that was a memo to all the teachers in the district, basically saying, I don't care what your teacher score is. I don't, whatever the right name of it. He basically said, teachers, care about the students, do your best for the students. We are behind you. We don't care what you do with your teacher score. And what a powerful statement. I know not every educator, not every principal or superintendent has the leeway to be able to do something like that. But is that the kind of things that you might be talking about when you talk about how to support our teachers, and what could we do to support our teachers, maybe from the mom and dad and community side as well?
Yeah, that's an important message. It's a powerful encouragement from that leader. It's an active leadership I would hope to see more of throughout our educational institution. And well, actually, I'll pass it back to you, because I agree with the statement made by that leader. I'd like to hear more of that story. So coming back to this concept of the teacher's score, which Michael mentioned, reminds me of this reality, this fact that we face, that within large systems, we must take in information, and often those systems put in place filters for the information. And then those filters actually limit the amount of reality that gets in. And then when that occurs, fiction will increase within the system. And so teacher score is a way of creating a kind of hallucination about whether we're doing the right things. And it just obfuscates the reality. It's a story we tell. Stephen, I really appreciated him earlier in your interview. He was talking about the stories that we tell ourselves or about our culture and about our reality. Those stories are often informed by great fiction.
Well, and I was thinking of the exact same thing. Talk Universe, we're doing a talk show format right now. We've just interviewed Stephen Coutinho on the stories that we tell. And as David was just sharing about these test scores for teachers, it's really just a story. And when you talk about the way that we have these scores and the way that we can evaluate, and then the fiction that happens, I'm like, that is exactly what we just heard about the story. And even you can't see this right now, but Stephen is nodding pretty vociferously right now. You got to join us on Facebook Live Talk Universe if you ever have the opportunity. It's a lot of fun. David, what can the parents, what can the community do to support superintendents who are, forward thinking, and support teachers who are literally right in the middle of the whole thing? Principals, vice principals, teachers, substitute teachers. What can we do from our end to be a force for positive change?
I think it's really important that parents show up, that they're present. They have a relationship with the teachers of their child or children. And also beyond that we show up as voters. I grew up in Canada, and, this is true of most of North America, Europe, many parts of the world, where we have public education supported in part by taxation. And so your vote really does create some boundaries for the future direction of educational institutions. So I think it's important to show up.
We've been enjoying this conversation with David Sabine. His talk is called Rethinking Education. And if you want to find out a little bit more about him, I'm going to give you the information. But first, we're going to jump right back in just a moment to the Blitz Round. People ask, how could I start a 7-day-a-week podcast? It's because of what I've learned from my mentors. Some of the best mentors in history aren't around anymore. They've left hours of one-on-one mentoring behind in their books. Each month at Classics on Tap, I record a new chapter from a classic business book to help you make a difference. Download your first chapter at classicsontap.com. And we're back with David Sabine. It is time for the Blitz round, in which I ask David a series of either-or questions related to the preparation and performance of his recent talk. David, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. David, were you selected or did you apply?
I applied at the a suggestion of a good friend of mine. He had heard this was coming, and he encouraged me to share my ideas.
Are you a improviser, a memorizer, or a blender?
I'm normally an improviser, but I found it really difficult to to keep it constrained to 12 minutes. So I did a lot of memorization. I'm a memorizer, I guess.
Memorize it. Now, how did that work for you? Because sometimes the memorizing, I've heard that can go both ways. So how did it go for you?
It worked out really well. In hindsight, if I were to do that was 6 years ago, actually. Mm-hmm. So I might do it differently now, but I don't regret the decision. And I also appreciate that most people, like Stephen and Galia that we've heard from earlier today, that they improvise. And like I said, I'm normally an improviser, but that particular event, I was stressed about keeping it brief. And so I thought to keep it within the time box of 12 minutes, I better prepare differently. And that worked out well.
So David, you walk out on stage. Did you have nerves, or were you in the zone, or neither, or both?
Well, I had an old English teacher once that said, if you're not nervous, you're not good. So I have to admit I was nervous. And but once I got on the stage, I became really comfortable because I saw familiar faces, and I knew, I guess I felt that the message was important, not just to me, but many in the audience. I knew that they'd appreciate it.
So what's a tip, a tool, or a technique that helped you?
Present it to multiple people, discuss it with people as often as possible. Pursue a mentor, recruit an audience. My wife heard my talk many times before the TEDx audience did. And I think that was important for me to work through the ideas and clarify how I would communicate them in such a way people would understand them clearly.
Yeah, well, Talk Universe, this is not, as you probably know by now, this is not a normal talk. So if you're not used to doing that kind of preparation, repetition, and multiple smaller performances, like David says, you probably want to rethink that, because it can, those lights in your face when you walk out on the stage, if you're not used to that, it could be a little different for you. So, David, in addition to that, what's a tip, tool, or technique that helped you prepare?
Well, search within yourself for your unique perspective. Mm-hmm. And then believe with confidence that nobody else in the entire world has seen what you've seen or has the idea that you have. And that's why it's worth sharing.
Absolutely. So we've been enjoying this conversation with David Sabine. His talk is called Rethinking Education. And if you want to know more about David, you can go to our show notes page over at BeTheTalk.com. We're going to have a link to his profile on LinkedIn, and you can connect with him on LinkedIn via our show notes page at BeTheTalk. You can also watch his talk, Rethinking Education, on the same link there, or you can type either one into Google or YouTube or LinkedIn to be able to connect with David that way. And in a moment, we're going to have just a little bit more of David Sabine for the final word of advice in just a moment. Everyone wants to change the world, but not everyone knows the first step. Before you can change the world with your talk, it has to be selected. So grab the templates, timelines, and tools that I use to get my talk selected at BeTheTalk.com. And we're back with David Sabine. It's time for the final word of advice for Talk Universe.
My word of advice is this: expect to be surprised and excited. I opened my talk with something that I hadn't scripted. I shared with the audience that my wife and we were having a baby. I wanted my daughter to have an awesome experience in school. And that came from the heart. That was the most important thing. Discover what's in your heart and then share that.
David, Sabine, thank you so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
It's been a pleasure, Nathan. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Be the Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.